E3 is the gaming conference. Well, it was the pinnacle of gaming conferences. This was as we were growing up. I mean, I remember hanging out with Zach and Josh and talking about E3 or watching E3 or basically anything. Um, Anything we ever really wanted to know about gaming was kind of released in this week in June. I think it's in June or early July, sometime in there. And they canceled this year's E3. They've been struggling in the past. I've been one to always update on it, but They will not be hosting the conference in person or virtually this year. Which for the last few years in the pandemic, they hosted stuff virtually that necessarily didn't go great. And so this year they're fully canceled. Um, I don't know. Have any of you guys ever been to like an actual conference or anything like that? We could
I
start
haven't.
with any of you who might have.
No, I am not.
Mm-mm.
Zach, you muted yourself to say no, but
There we go. We're back. No.
I've never attended. I've attended a virtual. I attended one virtual conference, and then I attended a work conference last year, and I understand why they were canceled for the pandemic. But E3 being canceled this year, I didn't necessarily see a lot of reasoning, but I did see a lot of the big names in the space being like, this might be it for E3. We might not ever see it come back again. For those of you who don't know, most of the big players in the space, Sony, Xbox, all that kind of stuff, have kind of gone to their own conferences where they are kind of in charge of how much time they get and their setups and all that kind of stuff. They're not necessarily limited by conference organizers and stuff like that. And they were doing their conferences in the same town as E3. So like E3 would be happening at the convention center, and then Xbox would rent out a venue maybe a few blocks away and do their conferences there in tandem while people were all in town for the conference. So I don't necessarily know how that's going to impact, the Xbox or PlayStation presentations, or if they will even all be on the same weekend anymore. I haven't really got any details on stuff like that, but it's interesting because I think that conferences are good. I think that a lot of people get a lot of good thing out of conferences, and I think that E3 had pretty much had run its course pretty much going into the pandemic. It was already on its dying breath, and E3 might be just another casualty that, COVID takes from us. But are you guys, I know that generally I'm the one who just watches all of E3 and then tells you guys what happens on this podcast, but are you guys sad to see it go for nostalgia purposes, or do you have any opinions on if conferences should just stay virtual so they can get as many attendees as possible?
I think it's hard for them not to really do that virtual route, especially with
Agree.
the last few years. Because what they really wants those numbers, and that's what's going to get you the most numbers, especially eyes on your event, is having that virtual environment, especially if you can fully put all of your resources to that. So I'm not too shocked to see that E3 is canceled. I'm actually a little bit with it being canceled and possibly knowing that it's going to be virtual from here on out. I'm curious to see what that means going forward. Like, is all of the major companies going to do something on their own? Are we going to have this large event to where it still might be a week, but everyone's doing their own thing for each day, something like that? I'm actually a little bit excited to see what this might entail from the canceling.
Yeah. I think one of the things, at least my brain just came up with it, is like conferences are good for smaller companies and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
too, because like the big draw is kind of like, old school malls, right? The big draw was like, oh, I'm going to Sears, right, or JC Penney, but I'm also going to walk through the mall and end up getting, something from the food court or stopping by some of the smaller shops. And I think that that's kind of what the conference environment really brought for them, right? So at E3, like I might be going to watch the PlayStation conference, but end up stopping by and either meeting a new developer or something like Mad Cats, or seeing some sort of new tech kind of displayed there. So I think that that is kind of rough if you think about other conferences, right? Like if you were thinking about uh what's the CNET or whatever the tech conference is, where like there's startups and stuff that are
Yeah.
trying to get off of the ground by being there where other technology is released. I think that's gonna suck for the games industry, like the small guy being edged out of the platform there. Because I know that,
Definitely.
yeah, it's gonna be tough because like small studios. I mean, you could imagine it. This probably exists in all facets. Like if a big like Sundance or something like that was just like gone, like some of these smaller studios were not going to get their 15 minutes of fame to try to get their scripts bought up or something like that. So that's gonna
Yeah.
suck. It's probably gonna be a big hit. I
Right.
didn't even realize that like until right now. What Zach was talking was being like, oh yeah, some of my favorite studios I only learned about because they were coupled with the big
'Cause they were
guys
there.
at E3.
Yep.
Yeah, like so that's gonna be real tough.
Hopefully they
Um,
can work something out like for the big companies because it makes sense for the the Sonys and stuff like that. They're gonna do their own conferences. The Nintendo. Hopefully they can partner up with these smaller ones to be like, oh, you can have your own little part here in the conference. For games you're gonna be releasing for our systems. And obviously they would get a cut of that. I just hope no matter what happens that there is still a live element because I have no interest like in a virtual like I'm just gonna see it on Twitter like 2 minutes after it happens. So it's like why am I gonna pay to
yeah,
watch something on a website that I can just see in a few minutes? But the in-person thing I think does really add a value, whether it's video games or
Does.
a Comic-Con or whatever. I think it really does add it, the value. So hopefully they still stay in that progression, even if it ends up being more broken up instead of just one E3. And who knows, maybe in an ideal scenario, the more broken up ones will be better because then you don't have to pay as much to go to a one E3. You can choose whichever one you want to go to. It might be a little bit
Mm-hmm.
cheaper, but I mean that's thinking optimistically. It's going to be hard for the smaller studios for sure.
yeah, it
I
would
just think
be.
there's just so much like benefits just doing stuff in person anyway that you just don't get online. Like I know you said like the ratings were down throughout the pandemic, which I find surprising, but like even watching like virtual shows, like virtual
Mm,
concerts throughout the
yeah,
pandemic, like I don't know, it just wasn't fully satisfying.
I
You
get
know, it
that.
was like cool. I get to see people like I wanted to see, and I get to see like some cool new bands and stuff. But like,
The
it wasn't the
energy was not
same
there.
fulfilling
Mhm.
Yeah.
experience. Like, cool, I'm just still on my couch, not wearing pants.
Yeah.
It's not
Mhm.
as fulfilling to me.
Yeah, I completely
Yeah.
agree because you like when you were watching things, at least when I was watching things on E3, the crowd reaction to whenever something like unannounced kind of dropped, right, would be
Hmm.
like,
Oh yeah.
"Oh my god!" Or
Exactly.
you hear that one guy like, "Holy shit, I fucking love
Yeah.
that!" Right? Like you don't get
Yeah.
that with virtual stuff, and like Maddie was saying, with virtual concerts, even you don't get like the energy of the crowd is not
No.
felt by the performer. It's not felt by the people consuming it. So hopefully, if we actually, clear out of the pandemic in the coming years, we can get something in place of E3. Maybe like, how they do PAX, they do PAX East and PAX West. Maybe they'll do something like not necessarily E3, but like E3 East and West or something like that. So more
Yeah.
people can kind of attend and it's generally cheaper that way.
Hmm.
Um, but in the games industry, it's going to be interesting because, like, right now, the biggest marketing place forward is the Game Awards. Um, but last year, the Game Awards, like, it came out, I think a report came out that was like 60% of the Game Awards, 60 to 70% of the Game Awards was advertising, and the other 30% was
Yeah.
actually the Game Awards or something like that. So,
Yeah.
I believe it.
I don't know how much more advertising they can fit into that before it's just like, hey, I watched 2 hours worth of commercials. It was sick. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah. Oh, Siri decided she wanted to pop in. But
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that E3's canceled this year, and I don't necessarily know if it's coming back or if we're going to get something new
Yeah.
in its place, which is
Mhm.
sad. But
It's sad.